Good morning and welcome. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'm like to welcome you to the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast Sunday morning service. And if there's somebody out there watching this morning or later on this week or whenever, and you've never been to a Center for Spiritual Living before, we believe there's one God, many paths to that God, and we're here to love, honor, and support you no matter what your divine path is. And the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast is a safe haven for people of all beliefs and lifestyles, whoever you are and wherever you may find yourself on your journey of faith, you're welcome here. And as we do every Sunday, we're going to open up with a prayer that my wife Becky, who's a practitioner emeritus, will deliver, and then Carol Gabika will honor us with a spiritual reading.
So I just invite everyone to turn within, into that oneness, the oneness in spirit. This all-knowing, all-powerful presence that is right here before us, right here within us. And I'm knowing my oneness and infinite spirit, that it is the very expression of who and what I am, always releasing itself more and more, emerging through me, as me, and for me. And I'm knowing this for everyone who's on this Zoom call right now, and everyone who is a witness of this recording later on. I am knowing our oneness in spirit. And so, knowing this, I'm realizing the truth of who and what each person is. The spiritual beings, always expressing the divine qualities, the love, the peace, the abundance, the serenity, so much more. Releasing more and more and more of spirit, because this is who and what each one of us is, this loving presence, this love that is always within each one of us. And so the same presence, the same power and expression is moving in through and as Reverend Dr. Ron, and through his message this morning, revealing the healing presence within each one of us, this power that is already here, right now, right here, before us. And so knowing that this divine presence and this infinite love is always right here, and knowing that it is unfolding its perfect outcome for each one of us, right here and right now. And so knowing this, I just release it. I release this prayer, just knowing that it is done. I claim it and know it. It is so. And so it is.
So it is.
Instrument, a tool for delicate work, reassembling broken pieces of fine china of life, delicate work. Hearts streaming tears down stressed faces, dark shadows protecting the corridors of fear, reaching for a spark of light, a reason to succeed, a reason for hope, delicate work. Mending torn curtains, mending fences. Becoming an instrument necessitates exposure, exposing the instrument to vulnerability, delicate work. Calling on the strength outside and inside. Help me be a tool for delicate work.
Thank you, Carol. So the title of my message today is Being an Agent of Healing. And the talk came about because years ago, I saw a quote, which I'll tell you in a minute. And it touched me so much that I asked Becky to laminate it for me. And I keep it pretty close. And here's the quote. It, understanding the suffering is beyond me. Understanding the healing is too. But in this moment, I am here. Use me. So I have to tell you something before I go on that happened this morning. About last year, I went through 2 or 3 months where every day I posted on Facebook and on the minister's listserv a quote. And I called it Words of Wisdom. And this morning on Facebook, I went on Facebook and it gave me something. I forgot exactly what they call it, but it was a memory from the past. And it was a quote that I put on last year on April 25th. And here's the quote. Understanding the suffering is beyond me. Understanding the healing is too. But in this moment, I am here. Use me. So I want to begin with a story. The quote, by the way, is from Rachel Remen. And I want to begin with a story I read this week by Rachel Remen. And it's a story about a young man who's in college, and he notices a lump on his right thigh. So he goes to the doctor and they do a biopsy, and it's cancer. And the doctor tells him he's going to have his right leg amputated at the hip. And the fellow says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he goes home to live with his parents. And he has no medical treatment whatsoever. The only thing that's done for him is the pastor of his church asks all of the congregants to pray for him every night at 7 p.m. And eventually, the lump grew smaller until it finally disappeared. Now, excuse me, now it's 20 years later, and some people are doing research, and they ask Rachel to see if she could find the original doctor that examined this young man. And she finds him. So she calls him up and she asks him if he remembers the case. And he said, yes, I do. It was such a tragedy. Is he dead? And Rachel said, no, he's not. And the doc says, well, where did he have the surgery? And Rachel says he never had the surgery. And she tells him the story as it was related to her. And somewhere, when she gets about halfway through the story, the doctor hangs up on her. And she tries calling him back several times, and he never returns her call. And writing about it, she says, most of us encounter more mystery than we're willing to experience because it's stressful and it can be frightening to us. And here's how she ended this article, a quote. She said, but if we're not willing to wonder, we may have to hang up the phone on life. If we're not willing to wonder, we may have to hang up the phone on life. And I think for me, the message is there's wonder all around us. And you know, in religious science, Ernest Holmes says there are no miracles. It's all the working of spirit. And when we talk about healing, we're talking about consciousness. So I want to tell you an article I read this week by a fellow named Lee Doyle. And the article was about 3 practices we can use to heal ourselves or others. So I want to share them with you. He said the first one is we can set intentions. We can set the intention for healing and create an ongoing mantra or prayer that we repeat several times a day. He said we can visualize or imagine ourself or someone else we're praying for having perfect health. The second practice, he says, is we can cultivate loving kindness in our relationships. And he says there we can send unconditional love and well wishes to ourselves or to somebody else without having any expectation of having anything come back to us. And some examples of that we might say are, may you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you know peace and joy. And we can use any words that resonate with us. And lastly, the third thing he mentioned was creating healing rituals. And let me give you two examples. The first one is we can create an altar at home, and it doesn't take much to do that. And we can put a picture of the person we're praying for, whether it's ourselves or somebody else. We can put that picture on the altar and we can focus on it when we're doing our prayer work or we're doing our meditation. And the other thing we can do is something we do all the time, but we can do it a little differently. When we wash our hands, we can do it with mindfulness. We can wash our hands and bring healing intentions to ourselves or to other people. I want to tell you another story I read this week about healing. And it's about a woman who had HIV for 15 years. And she never, during that time, ever took drugs. And her HIV never went to full-blown AIDS. She said that she prays and she meditates every day, and she believes that God prevented the virus from becoming full-blown AIDS. And the person that wrote the article was interviewing a researcher that knew this woman. And the researcher laughed and said, now, I am not encouraging people not to use drugs. She said, but she has found in her research that the people that turned to God had much better results, even if they didn't take drugs. And that the people that felt abandoned by God didn't do as well. Let me tell you what Ernest Holmes, a quote from Ernest Holmes. He said, if you're experiencing some condition which is unhappy, you must know there is nothing in you that attracts this condition, nothing in you that holds it in place, and nothing in you that believes it must be this way. Joel Goldsmith wrote, the place where I stand is holy ground. Why? Why? Because where I am, God is. And then he wrote, he that is within me is greater than any problem I can be faced with. I am not alone. If I walk through the waters, God is with me. If I go through the flames, God is with me. There is no place that I could be that God is not present where I am. So I want to talk for a few minutes about Joe Dispenza. I've talked about him before, and I know some of you have read his books. So I read an article by Joe this week, and let me tell you how he started it out with 3 case histories. The first one is about a man who died after hearing that he had untreatable, incurable cancer. After he died, they did an autopsy and they found out it was a misdiagnosis. He didn't have cancer, but he believed he did and that it was incurable. Second case study is about a woman who, for most of her life, suffered from depression. And she was lifted out of this depression when she was part of an antidepressant drug trial. She believed with all her heart that while she was in that trial, she received the drug when she actually got the placebo. And the last example that he gives is a group of veterans who got relief from osteoarthritis by going through an operation that was a sham. The doctors made a small slit and then they sewed them back up without doing anything else. So I want to move from it. I'm going to come back to Joe in a minute, but I want to move to something else real quick. I read something by Greg Braden this week, and I loved the way he defined the placebo. So I want to share it with you. He said the placebo effect is when patients believe that they're experiencing some beneficial procedure, when in reality, whatever they got has no healing properties whatsoever. What's important is the patients believe that something is being done. It's consciousness. So back to Joe. Joe says we can learn to create new neural pathways and make new neural connections so we can break old ways of being. And this is crucial. He said the changes in our brain lead to changes in our body. The changes in our brain lead to changes in our body. And he said the key is a technique that he calls mental rehearsal. Mental rehearsal. It's where you imagine the desired outcome in such a way that you make your inner thoughts more real than what's happening on the outside. You go in to visualization, or whatever you want to call it, imagination, and you make those thoughts more real than what's actually happening. And he said, if you make it feel real enough, your brain won't know the difference. So in other words, we have the ability, by making it feel real enough, to actually fool our own brain. And when we do that, then we fire new neutrons and we make new connections until it looks like whatever it is actually happening. You know, I'm not going to do it now, but I've talked about, Joe gave an example on how his daughter wound up going to Italy for a summer vacation. I've talked about that, I think, fairly recently. But the point he made to his daughter, when she sits down to meditate, to visualize on it, that the person that gets up from that visualization can't be the person that sat down. You have to make it so real that you fool yourself, you fool your brain. So let's talk about Louise Hay, who's a famous religious science minister who wrote all kinds of books about healing. And she said, you know, if there's a thought, a belief that doesn't serve you, let it go. Let it go. There's no law that says once you have a belief, once you believe something, that you have to continue to believe it forever, because whatever we believe comes true for us. Whatever problems we have come from thought patterns. And Ernest Holmes says that all the time. It's not one thought, it's the pattern of our thinking that brings things into our life. And thought patterns, the good news is, if we're not happy, thought patterns can be changed. No matter what the issue we're dealing with, no matter how difficult it seems to us, because there's no degree of difficulty in spirit. It's only an outer result, or the effect of an inner thought pattern. And she says, look at your life and ask yourself, what kind of thoughts am I having that create this? What kind of thoughts am I having that create this? And she said, ask yourself, is it true for me now? Where did that belief come from? Do I have that belief because a first grade teacher kept telling me that over and over again? And would it be better if I dropped that belief? And one of the points she makes is the point of power is in the present moment, that none of us are ever stuck. You and I are the power in our world, and you get to have whatever thoughts you choose to have. And she has an exercise that I really like. I think I've talked about it maybe a year or so ago. But she says, imagine that you're in a cafeteria, or you're at a buffet in a luxurious hotel, where instead of food dishes that they serve dishes of thought. And you get to choose all of the thoughts that you want, and as many of them as you want. And she says, these are the thoughts that are going to create your future experiences. And she says, if you choose thoughts that you know are going to cause you pain, isn't that silly? It's like eating a food you know is going to make you sick. And so as we move through life, as we go through our life, I think the message is we can choose thoughts that are life affirming. We can choose thoughts that are healthy and that bring to us the joy and the goodness of life. And one of the things she said, that one of her mentors was Raymond Charles Barker. And he used to say, when there's a problem, there's not something to do, there's something to know. So I want to end with one last story that speaks to the God within, and I found really touching. And it's in a book by Wayne Muller. And it's a story about a priest who's visiting a man with Alzheimer's. And the Alzheimer's is in a really advanced stage. And for the last 5 years, this man's wife has been taking care of him with no help. It's her gift to him because she loves him so much. And he doesn't recognize her anymore. He has no idea of who she is. And yet, when the priest approaches him to give him the sacraments, a tear rolls down this man's cheek. And Wayne makes the point that even from where he is, even in a coma, there's some exchange between the God within the priest and the God within the man. This man who is probably going to die soon. But that doesn't matter. The circumstances don't matter. There's always a light within you and I that will not die. And his wife, what about his wife? After 40 years, who is she caring for? Is it her husband? Is it a stranger? Or is it God caring for God? The hand of God moving through each one of them. And I'll just close with this quote from the poet Tagore, who said, "After you had taken your leave, I found God's footprints on my floor." God bless you. Have a wonderful week, and thank you for being here this morning.